Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about the top challenges facing boards in 2023. And joining me in this annual event is Maria Moats, who's the leader of PwC's Governance Insight Center. Welcome back, Maria.
Thanks, TK. Great to be here.
So every year at this time, we sort of look ahead and see how what we each believe might be issues that boards should be considering or thinking about, because we think they are pretty important to being successful and the board being effective in 2023. So as usual, I'm going to let you go first with this process and tell me what your first issue or challenges for boards in 2023?
So I'll start with good governance, and I'll tell you why. In all this uncertainty that we're faced with, when you think about the macroeconomic environment, geopolitical environment, looking at a potential recession, some would say they're in Europe, you're already in a recession. I think that what we need to focus on first and foremost as a community of directors is good governance. And while it's not a cure for uncertainty, we know that strong governance practices really help us set a foundation for effective oversight, and it builds trust with stakeholders. And by stakeholders, I'm specifically talking about shareholders, as well as regulators, but also customers, suppliers, so on and so forth. And one thing we need to remember is that by building this trust and allowing them to understand what the board is doing and how they're doing it, that will get us a long way down the road. So I would tell you to focus on good governance, get strategic, perhaps creative with disclosures, both in your proxy as well as in other areas of the website.
So I couldn't agree more, okay, with your first one. I think that foundation that you build, and I think of the importance of the board committees and how they are such strong legs to good governance, and even some of the outside of the three normal committees, the companies that recognize that, either safety or environment or ESG or strategic planning, that form a committee because they know it needs attention in between board meetings and to have somebody assigned to it. So all those things that create that foundation of good governance, I would agree with you, is puts you in a position that the chances of you getting through any of the challenges in 2023 are going to be much easier. So
right.
Great first point. So my first point is our challenge would be, I think, is going to be this constituency stakeholder issue and how you should balance that going forward. And I sort of put the stakeholders into two buckets. I have major constituencies, which I call employees, customers, and shareholders. And there's a balance there. And that balance is so important. And let me give you an example. So let's just say that a company was not current with their employee pay, okay? And they were given extra dividend to shareholders or leaning towards that versus being current. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know if you start to have a lot of turnover or you're not having great customer service, all of a sudden now you've affected not only the employee major constituency, but you've affected the customer because they aren't getting what they need. Well, if you affect those two, I guarantee you that the financial will have an effect to it. So sitting above the trees, I think it's very important for directors to take a step back and look at, are we balanced? How sustainable is the path that we're on, okay, in dealing with our stakeholders? And then in the secondary, you have suppliers, which we've seen in the supply chain are very critical. We have community, making sure that the communities that we're in are prospering along with the corporation. And then finally, in many places, you have creditors that care a great deal about what's going on and what's happening. So that would be one of my big challenges for 2023.
I like that one a lot, and it ties into my second one, and you and I have talked about this before, around talent and workforce, and really focusing there. And I really think that given everything that you said in terms of finding the right balance, as well as really just understanding that talent works in a different way now, certainly different than years ago, I think the boards really need to understand how the company is looking at the talent strategy, and specifically, what are the underlying policies that are actually changing because talent strategies should be changing. Everything around retention, flexibility, promotion, hiring, everything's changing, but specifically, how is the management team really thinking about changing underlying policies? And that will be very telling, because if nothing's changing, then really, do you have the right talent strategy? So I would start with that. And the last thing I'll do is I will tell you that on talent, the board really needs to think about whether they're getting the right reporting on a periodic basis to really measure if these talent strategies are actually working. If you're not getting that reporting with the right cadence, where you really can tell if the strategies are working around pick your thing, whether it's diversity, hiring, whatever, then I think you really need to challenge whether you should be getting more in that. So that's my second one, focusing on talent and workforce and getting specific on changing policies and data to monitor progress.
So let me ask you a question, Maria. This is another one of those issues that a good number of the board members that are more senior and been sitting on the board for a while have never experienced in their time. They have never seen employees making decisions the way they make decisions now. They have never seen the concept that if I can't work remotely, I'm going to switch companies. And my question to you is, can compensation committees be, and ones that are responsible for human capital, can they be creative enough, okay, to adapt to, what we see happening and what is necessary?
I think they can, and boards are spending a lot of time in this area with talent, whatever committee of the board is actually doing it. I think the questions to ask the leaders within the organization, your CEO, your chief HR leader, is how are you actually not only understanding this new workforce and what motivates them, but how are you inspiring them? And questions like that and getting into that dialogue with the management team can really, really help the board understand how they could provide that advice in a new environment that's completely different. But really getting into those questions will help the board understand whether they have the right leaders within the organization as well.
So my next one would be, and again, this is unusual for us that we're sort of not hitting on things like cybersecurity or specific like digital transformation and things that we might have talked about in the past. But my, again, challenge, I think, for boards in 2023 is to focus and try and cut through the noise. Okay. Right now, there is a ton of noise in around the boardroom related to pressure, pressure on ESG from investors. There's workforce issues. There's all this disclosure talk and all the changes that are going to be. And if you get too caught up in that, I'm afraid that you're not going to focus on the critical issues that you have as a board member, and you still have the need for making sure the company is going in the right direction. You have the need on the issues that I talked about, that whether it's everything from, again, cybersecurity to all the things that you have to work on that are part of the strategy. And it just seems to me that, and I'll give you another example in the ESG. I had the chance the other day to sit with the heads of stewardship on two of the largest three investors, on Vanguard and on State Street. And I asked them, about them putting pressure on companies on ESG. And they said to me, TK, I'm not sure where you get that, because our positions, and this may not be true for BlackRock and others, but our positions are, we're not putting pressure on ESG. We know it's tough to figure out. What we want companies to do and boards to do is to figure out what ESG issues are important to the value of the company. And it was sort of enlightening to me, because that wasn't the position I thought that they were taking. So sometimes the noise that's around you is not necessarily noise that you need to worry about as much. So stay focused. Remember the blocking and tackling that you have to be an effective board. And I think this year more than any year, you're going to need that laser focus to make sure that you can take the company through these tough times.
I love the staying focused in light of everything that's going on. And I'm going to tell you, my third point is ESG. And it's interesting you had that conversation. It's ESG from the perspective of, how do you, as a director, really give advice to management when you're looking at the long-term strategy, when you know the company needs to perform in the short term? You also know that there are headwinds around potential recession. So what do you focus on as it relates to ESG? And I would tell you that at the end of the day, the companies, and we've seen this from our own surveys, 83% of the CEOs told us they're focusing on growth going into 23. And so they're focusing on, how do you differentiate and how do you grow? And in order to differentiate, you have to go back to understanding stakeholders and what matters, and elements of E, S, and G matter to your stakeholders. So that's how you're going to differentiate, and that's how you're going to grow. So you don't have to call it ESG if you don't want to, but at the end of the day, that's the strategy of the company, to differentiate and to grow. And so while I understand that some may not want to focus on ESG going into 23, at the end of the day, TK, I think we're all focusing on differentiation and growth going into 23. So my third one was ESG for those reasons. Well,
great guidance. And Maria, this is happens to be our last show of the year. Okay. It's always a pleasure for you and I to sort of dig deep and try and look ahead to the future. But equally important, I would like to wish all of our viewers from Diligent, and I think I speak for PwC and our other partners in inside America's Boardroom, and I want to wish our viewers a happy holidays. And I hope your 2023 is right on focus, and everyone has a great year. So Maria, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope equally you have a great holiday and a happy new year.
Thanks, TK. Same to you.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next year when we take another look at critical topics that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.